Hey folks, today I've received the second edition upgrade kit for the Deep Rock Galactic board game. I backed the first edition of this originally, and I'll put a link up here to the video of me opening that first edition version of the game. The second edition was released with the new biome and space rig expansions, which again, I'll have a link again up here to that unboxing as well. Now, I didn't back the biome and space rig expansions on Kickstarter, which is why I had to purchase the second edition upgrade kit separately. It only recently became available to buy on the Mood Publishing website, and I'll have a link in the description of where you can get it. For me, the price was £11 for the upgrade kit, and then an additional, I think, £8 for shipping, which is very steep considering it seems to have just been shipped from the UK, but I don't know. So in total it was £19 for this, and I'd rather have it than not have it, but I do still think it was quite expensive. To be fair, that's often the case for everything that Mood Publishing do, so not really a surprise. Alright, without further ado, let's open this up, and we're going to compare the contents to the equivalents from the first edition, and see what the differences are. First things first, we have another one of these for AC West, the place to play, 18th to 20th of October in Telford. Then we have all of the stuff. So starting off, we have some cards down here, and then we have the new updated mission book and instruction manual. So let's open these up. Alright, so first things first, we have the Deluxe Edition rulebook. So this rulebook is very different to the first edition rulebook. You can see it's a full A4 size. If we compare that to the original, this is what the original looks like. So you can see it is significantly bigger now, which is good. I'm not going to go through all of the differences, but apparently parts of the rulebook have been rewritten to make them clearer. And I don't know whether that also means that some of the actual rules have been updated. But you can see it's a very high quality rulebook. I actually really liked the original rulebook as well, so this is good. It also includes the creature list as well in here. Stuff about deep dives. Yeah, I think most of this was already in the original booklets, but there's going to be things that are different. For example, it references the creature cards, which we'll look at in a minute. So yeah, that is the updated rulebook. Next is the updated mission book, which once again is significantly bigger. You can see it looks exactly the same pretty much. And I would assume that this just contains the missions in exactly the same format as they were before. I'd be very surprised if there were any more, but I do prefer the larger mission books. It makes it a lot easier to see what you're doing. So if we find mission 3 in this book, you can see it's exactly the same, but everything is a lot larger, so it just makes it easier to read if you have old person eyes like me. Then if we go to the end, I think there's got the Dark Caves, Bug Sanctuary, Devil's Fork. I think that's the last one. Yep, and then it talks about how to design your own missions. So all exactly the same as the first edition. And the final changes are these cards here. So first of all, we have these quick reference cards for each player. So I assume there's 4 of these. These are really useful because they actually give each player an easy indication of what they need to do. You see player aid card. It's the sort of stuff that as you continue to play, you will remember what you can do, but it is nice to have it written down like this. So you get 4 player aid cards. Next to the enemy reference cards. So one of the changes that was made with the second edition is that the Goo Bomber now goes before the Grunts. If you see, Grunt is number 1, but the Goo Bomber is number 0. So the Goo Bomber now actually goes before the Grunt. Originally, instead of these creature cards, in the first edition, you got this massive board, where so you see it's double-sided, and essentially the rules stated you would start with the Grunt, work your way down, then flip the board over and continue to work your way down. With the Goo from Above expansion, which was the only other expansion available at the time of the first edition's release, you would then have a similar card. So this is the card that came with the Goo from Above expansion, the first edition, so very similar to this one, and essentially the rules were you would go from Grunt all the way down, you would flip it over, go all the way down to Warden, and then it would be Goo Bomber, then Menace. But with these cards, that has obviously changed. So now the Goo Bomber is first, and then it should be the same order as on the board. So you see, it would go Goo Bomber, then Grunt, Web Spitter, Exploder, Mactera, Slasher. So it's all in the same order as before. Oppressor, Warden, and then Menace at the end. Now, there is actually a change that this brings in, which I think is pretty good. So the goo bomber attacks an area and it fires goo on that area. Very strange it doesn't actually tell you that on the card. See, if we look at this, the goo bomber will fly towards the nearest dwarf. When it attacks, it not only hurts its target, but also surrounds it with sticky goo. Regardless of the dice result, place goo tokens on all vacant spaces surrounding the target. Now, that's quite interesting because it doesn't mention it anywhere on the card, which is actually very unhelpful because that's the whole point of the goo bomber. But the point would be that you would put the sticky goo markers all around, and then because the goo bomber goes first, it means that the other glyphids also get stuck in the sticky goo, whereas before when the goo bomber was going almost last, it meant that basically it was just the dwarves that were getting stuck in the goo. So this actually is a balance that makes the game slightly easier in my opinion. But yeah, not very helpful. It doesn't mention it on the card. In fact, it doesn't really mention much on the cards. You can see it says you get a rock and stone card for the spitball effector. This one says that you ignore resistance when attacking from behind, and it says that the warden spawns one grunt, but it doesn't state on the card that it protects the grunt. So I think these are a bit of a downgrade, to be honest. And finally we have 4 additional cards, and these are actually just reprints of existing cards. So we're going to look at what the difference is. So we have a Slasher Emerges, which is an event card, Rapid Spitballer Growth, which is an event card, Dug Out Surprise, which is an event card, and then Rock Solid, which is a Rock and Stone card. So let's see what the difference is between these and the first edition. Okay, so starting with the Rock Solid, Rock and Stone cards, this is the original card here, which states deal 1 additional damage when attacking a creature, and the second edition card states deal 1 additional damage as you or another dwarf attacks a creature. So a bit of a buff to this card, which is pretty nice. Next we have Dug Out Surprise. The original card says place a grunt on an empty ground space adjacent to you if possible. Dwarves within attack range of the grunt each receive a free reaction against it if it survives it attacks you. The new card says place a grunt on an empty ground space adjacent to you if possible, otherwise ignore this card, just to make it entirely clear that you can ignore the card if it's not possible. The rest of it is exactly the same. Next is a Slasher Emerges. The original card says place a slasher on an empty ground space adjacent to you if possible. Dwarves within attack range of the slasher each receive free reaction attack against it. If it survives, it attacks you. So it's the same as the grunt card. And you can see, once again, the only difference here is it says, if possible, otherwise ignore this card. There does seem to be a slight difference down here. So it does say all other dwarves within attack range of the slasher each receive a free reaction against it. Just to make it clear that there's more than one dwarf, then they each get an attack. Which is kind of funny, because on the reprinted second edition Dugout Surprise card, it does not stipulate that, which implies that even you get a free reaction against the grunt, which is a bit odd. Then for the Rapid Spitballer Growth, the original card says place a Spitballer on any empty ground space 1 to 3 spaces from the drop pod, all other creatures activate. The new card says place a Spitballer on any empty ground space 1 to 3 spaces from the drop pod or from where the drop pod will return if not present. All other creatures activate. So that's just to make it clear, because normally you flip the drop pod over once you have started the mission and everyone has exited it. So this is just to make it clear that it also means where the drop pod would go back to, not just where it is, because if it ain't there, you can't put it anywhere. So that is the second edition upgrade kit for Deep Rock Galactic. I'll be honest, for the price that I paid and for the contents that's in here, it is 100% not worth it, in my opinion. If you have the first edition of the game, you don't need to get this. I do like having larger rule books, that's always nicer, but again, it's not entirely necessary. These are obviously very nice, but again, not necessary. The creature cards, I like them in theory, and it does bring them in line with the expansions which use these creature cards, but the fact that the cards don't actually state the special conditions that each creature uses makes them kind of unhelpful. Like, you have all of this empty space on the card. Nowhere do you mention that the goo bomber puts sticky goo around where it attacks. That's like the whole point of the goo bomber. If it's not on the card, what is the point? Same with like the exploder card. It doesn't state here that when the exploder dies, it rolls a red explosive die and does damage adjacent to it. So there's just things like that which are misses on the card. The warden card doesn't say that it protects other bugs. So it just seems really, I don't know, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Finally, the upgraded wording on these cards is fine, I guess. The only thing that I think is a bit odd is how they stipulate in the Slasher Emerges cards that all other dwarves get a reaction against the Slasher, but it doesn't specify that on the Dugout Surprise card, so I don't know whether that means you can also react against the Grunt. Usually the rules are that all other dwarves react and not yourself, but again, they had the opportunity to update the card and they didn't, so very strange. But anyway, there you go. If you were interested and wanted to know what the second edition upgrade kit includes, now you know. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.